Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all so much for joining. My name is Delia Mogahid, and I'm the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. This is the fourth and final webinar in our series on new research for community conversations. Today's topic is absolutely essential and oftentimes overlooked. An estimated 61 million adults in the United States live with a disability, and roughly 1 in 4 adults in the US have some type of disability. Thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act, American law prohibits, quote, discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, public accommodations, communications, and access to state and local government programs and services. And though the law goes a long way to protect the rights of people with disabilities, in countries that don't have these kinds of laws, things are very different. The lived realities of families with members with disabilities are rarely centered when we discuss the American Muslim community. So to address this gap, ISPU included the topic on its American Muslim poll in 2020. And this is a nationally representative poll of Americans with different faiths, including Muslims, as well as Americans of no faith. This research, though, is just a first step in addressing the needs of Muslims with disabilities. We're also going to be hearing about research that Muhsin, the organization Muhsin, conducted with families with family members or who have themselves are living with disabilities. Community leaders cannot afford to ignore the needs of this segment of any community and should start by listening to the impacted members to learn how faith spaces can better meet their needs. And we hope to really catalyze this conversation and amplify this conversation today during this webinar. I'm so excited to introduce our panel. But before I do, I'm just going to share with you some of the research that we've conducted on with the American Muslim community regarding Muslims with disability. So I am sharing my screen, and the first, sort of just to set the stage, the first thing that we learned by doing research on American Muslims regarding disability is that nearly a third of all American Muslims, as well as families of any other faith and no faith, have a family member with a disability, who live with a disability. Now, why I'm saying this right off the bat is a third of our community is a very large segment. So we simply can't ignore Muslims with disabilities. We can't build mosques where this is not considered. We can't create programming where we're not thinking about this. This is a significant and important segment of our community. If you think about it, a third of our community is a larger percentage than the percentage of Muslims who are Arab, or the percentage of Muslims who are South Asian. It would be, to erase one entire segment of our community by ignoring them. It's really same as not considering Muslims with disabilities in our conversations about American Muslims. Now, when asked in our survey, most Muslims believe that their community accommodates the needs of those with disabilities. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, but what we have as sort of the baseline is that Muslims are as likely as Jewish Americans and Catholics and Protestants to say that their faith community accommodates the needs of people living with disabilities. It's not 100%, so there's always room to grow, but Muslims are not too different from other communities. The other thing to note is that when we compare families that have a member of their family living with a disability and those who do not, this number is actually the same for both groups, which actually for me, as the person who looked at this data or analyzed it for the report, surprised me. I thought that the numbers would be different. People who are, experiencing the issue themselves might have a different point of view, but in fact, the two groups were the same. So if you'd like to learn more, please join our mailing list at ispu.org to get our latest research right into your inbox, and check out our website where you can learn more about the views and behaviors of American Muslims at ispu.org/poll. And now we're going to hear from Juhi, who I'll introduce and then ask her to come on camera. And Juhi's going to be sharing fascinating research that the organization she founded, Muhsin, conducted. Juhi is co-founder and executive director of Muhsin. As a graduate from Boston University with a degree in business management and having spent over 20 years excelling in the corporate world, speaking globally about strategies in the marketing field, Juhi turned her talents to become a national advocate for Muslims with disabilities. This led her to be the co-founder with Sheikh Omar Suleiman of Muhsin. And she is also the appointed executive director of the organization. Muhsin stands for Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs. And with that, I will turn the floor to Juhi, who will go through the research, and I'll help with the slides, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Dalia, for, first of all, the invitation to be part of this really wonderful panel. I always like to say, in order to have a voice, in order to be empowered, in order to be a community that's included, we have to have a seat at the table first. And this is, mashallah, a seat at the table. I commend the work of ISPU, and I've told Dalia since the first day I met her that we really need to dig deeper into this community. And as you just heard in the opening, these are not few people that we're speaking of. These are a lot of people in our community that we're speaking of. And, my background professionally aside, I basically fell into this world when I became a parent to now an adult daughter with disability. So with that, I want to say that what was really important when we founded the organization Muhsin, Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs, was that we did not build an organization, another nonprofit, another Muslim nonprofit for just awareness. And one of the key things was, what are we going to do with the awareness? We need to raise awareness, but at the same time, we need to act on it and make a difference on the ground. A lot of what we're doing is very grassroots, and what's directing the work of the organization to support and empower people with disabilities is actually, some of the research that I'm going to take you through today, very, very high level, some key points. Muhsin did a study. We have a needs assessment survey that is out there and that is distributed, and basically the method with which people can access it, there is a link on the Muhsin website for families, for caregivers, for individuals themselves who live with disability, and they can go through and answer the survey questions, a lot of which there is some demographic information about who they are, how old they are, and where they are, but there's also information about what are the services and supports you're looking for either yourself living with disability or for a loved one in your family that you care for with disability. This survey is continuously available on the website, but it's also a survey that masjids and communities around the country that we work with, they are actually being asked to go ahead and share the findings share the survey so that people can, put in their responses. So with that, Muhsin is nationwide. We work with about 70 communities across the country. We have people from around the globe reaching out to us, but predominantly I'll be discussing the American Muslim community today. And we would like to just jump into the next slide and share. If we can go to the slide.
if you give us 1 second,
Sure.
I'm actually asking Kat to share our slides because my internet is unstable and
Sure.
so you were freezing. Oh,
Oh,
okay. I'm gonna do it.
okay.
These technical things are always so. Are you able to see the slides?
It says that you've started the screen sharing, but the slide is not up. I don't see the slide.
Okay, let me try one more time. Please bear with me. It has just totally disappeared. You can't see now, right? There's, okay. I don't know what's going on. Okay, let me just try one more thing. Please, okay. Here we are. Okay, everyone see that? Great. I will just go to present and we'll be all set.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So essentially what I wanted to jump right into was we have actually now over 1,200 respondents to this particular survey that Mohsen has put out, our needs survey. And it's important to note that we kind of broke down by type of disability, and 67% of the respondents actually reported their family to have someone with a developmental disability. And that can be defined as that would include autism and Down syndrome, intellectual disability. These are the types of disabilities that you hear about so much in every community, and Muslims are no different. I just want to share a statistic that autism, according to the CDC, is now at a rate of 1 in 54 children are diagnosed with a form of autism. Down syndrome is 1 in 700 births. So back to what Dalia was saying at the beginning, the numbers are staggering. This is a very large number of people, whether or not we see them in our communities. And with that, I want to talk to the next slide, which takes us a little bit to the geographics of where our study saw responses coming from. So again, as I mentioned, it's nationwide, and we do have about 9 chapters around the country where Mohsen predominantly works with multiple states. However, 9 chapters, which are clusters of communities that are even more active. This is no surprise either to see that California, Illinois, and Texas had the highest number of respondents to the Mohsen survey. Again, high populations of Muslims living in these areas, as you will probably find in most research. What's very interesting here is Mohsen was born and headquartered in Illinois, in Chicago, which is actually where Mohsen is headquartered now, where I'm based. However, we had a very high number of respondents in Texas also, and in California. My co-founder, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, is obviously based in Texas, but this is where the community is really speaking out. And a close fourth outside of that was New Jersey. New Jersey was another state where we had a lot of responses. And the last thing I'm going to say about this geographic distribution is that outside the US, a huge number of responses are coming in from Canada, UK, and Ethiopia. People in these areas are reaching out to Mohsen. They have found Mohsen, and people are looking for supports and services even outside the American Muslim community. With that, I want to jump to the next slide where we talk a little bit, and this may be a little strange to look at, but we're saying here that in our study and in our findings, 65% of people living with disabilities who answered the Mohsen survey are under the age of 18. This is a very, very young population. A lot of parents and caregivers took the study and took the time to put in their responses. So I am not equating this to the statistics around the country for people living with disabilities, but I'm simply saying that Mohsin's study garnered this response that 65% of people who took the survey in here were the age bracket that was asked of them, it was under the age of 18. Again, the Muslim population in America is a very young population. Another factor is that the idea of community inclusion and better inclusion at the mosque level, and weekend school programming and those types of things that Mohsin stands for, a lot of that also appeals, it skewed more towards a younger audience and younger families. And so I do want to say also 44% of people who identified as living with disability were male. In our study, 44% are male and 22% have multiple disabilities. So not only are they living with one disability, but they have multiple diagnoses. So that's important to know also about American Muslims living with disability. The next slide will tell you a little bit about what people are asking for. We have had asked across the board, and we had broken it out into different types of supports that people would look for, different types of accommodations that people would look for at the mosque level, at the community level. And I don't want people to think that everything that Mohsin does has to be centered around the masjid or the place of worship. However, we do have, accommodations at community events, at fairs, at dinners, at conventions, at classes, seminaries. So you name it, wherever the Muslim population is where we would be willing to accommodate and support. In regards to support groups, 76% of respondents, these caregivers or individuals, they said that they would be interested in a support group. That's huge for a community that generally is known for having a lot of stigma about living with disability. The support groups that Mohsin has offered in the past have been in person as well as virtual, and we would have typically a licensed professional, a mental health counselor, a family therapist, a social worker who would facilitate the group. However, it would be open discussion for people to discuss their challenges and resources and really build that network together. So 76% of these families came out and said, yes, I would attend a support group and I want to meet other families just like ours, which is, I think, wonderful that people want to come out and kind of put the past behind us where we used to hide these diagnoses, but actually come out and come together. The next slide I want to talk about, it was a very telling slide, and the difference between the research I think that ISPU has done and has put out, where we are talking about, how people are feeling accommodated in the community of disability. We drill down, we speak specifically to Muslims. And so this could look a little bit different than, across the whole American community of people living with disabilities. When we asked on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst and 10 being the best, family members' acceptance in the community, it was a 6.5 out of 10. So it was just over moderate. And when we asked a family member's accessibility to masjid-related events, just over half of them said, all of them over the range said from 1 to 10, I'd rate it about a 5, 5.5. So just basically, a little over 50%. I'm able to access masjid-related events, but this is not something where I'm feeling like we're all the way there. So this is what we look at, and then we ask, what kind of accommodations do you want? Do you need sign language? Do you need a Braille Quran? Do you need specialized childcare? And we'll get into some of these things later, because again, as I mentioned, being a grassroots organization founded to support these people, we didn't just want to talk. We wanted to know specifically and then cater our services to exactly what the families were asking for. I do want to take you to just something to add into this to enrich this discussion. There actually was another study, a very small study, and I preface this by saying it was a very small study done by the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition in partnership with Marquette University. I was invited to share as they released the study and share some of my thoughts on it. So I had wanted to bring this to the forefront since there are so few studies done in the area of disability. So I wanted to share. They were done interview style. It was, people were allowed to remain anonymous, but the respondents were female, majority, 79%. The study took place 2018 into 2019. The majority of respondents are married, 70%. They have children, 89% of them have children, and 71% of them are employed. And they reported, as Muslim women, that they experienced discrimination. 81% of them in this survey said that they had experienced discrimination towards a family member with disability. This is staggering. When I heard this was staggering. We did not at Muslim ask the participants or the respondents if they had faced any kind of discrimination, but we certainly, were alarmed to see this number, and we were saddened by it because that meant that people had incidents that were less than pleasant, and these people, were having trouble accessing the community. I do want to say that, the key themes and what people talked about were stigma. They talked about culturally responsive resources. What does that mean? That means that someone needs to understand my culture, my religion, what my lens is before they can give me a resource. So for example, coming into the mosque with a young male that you're a caregiver for is going to work for only so long. When that young male grows up into a young man, that young man will no longer be able to be with you in the mosque in the women's section. So this is something that is part of our deen, part of our culture in most mosques. And so these are things that people need to understand about community access into disability, for the world of people living with disability. Inclusivity and uncertainty about caregiving was also mentioned as a theme in that study, meaning what happens after I can no longer be a caregiver for this individual? These are questions I ask myself every day as a parent. You have to have that firm belief that your community and your family and your friends are all going to gather and step up and fulfill the role of the sunnah, essentially, of being able to care for these individuals when you no longer are able to. And that has been also a huge part of our work going forward. And at the onset of the launch of the organization, we talked about planting seeds for the future of this population. And I'd just like to share, I believe it's my last slide before we get to the amazing other panelists that we have here. And the last slide talks about the supports that were actually requested. If we can move to the next slide, please. The supports that were requested by respondents who are looking for Mohsin to help out in the community. One of those supports is the support groups that I already spoke about. And during the pandemic, these were exceptionally well attended because people were at home and they could sign on online, from home. And there was a lot of comfort there in building these networks and support groups. People are looking for access to programs and classes. Like I mentioned, if I want to go to a class or I want to go to a conference, what would I do? I would, need someone to take over caregiving duty for my child because I would not be able to access the class perhaps with that individual. Perhaps I'm someone who needs a transcriber to take notes. Perhaps I'm someone who needs sign language to process the information. So that's access. There was a need to have access to Islamic education. And a lot of families have asked for weekend school programs. I'm really, really, really proud of the team to say that we have, mashallah, 16 or 17 weekend school programs now across the country for children with special needs. We were also asked for open houses or like social events. So you'll see Mohsin doing a lot of social activity for these families to come out of isolation, to be able to meet one another, to be able to meet the community at large. And then when there are events that do not seem conducive conducive to having their loved one with special needs, well, we need to have a care option, whether you're an adult or a child, and Muslim provides those care options for those individuals. So this is just to show you that the research is there, the study is there, but at the same time, the programs are being built to match what the requests are. So alhamdulillah, we're really glad to be doing that work, and we're really happy to have been included in the discussion here today, and I look forward to the rest of it. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. Thank you so much.
Hi all, this is Kat in the background with ISBU. Dalia may be having trouble or be muted. Dalia, could you unmute?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I was talking and no one was hearing me, so I'm very sorry. I'd like to ask all our panelists to come on to video and audio, please, so we can start our panel discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Zeba Khan, who is the Director of Development for MuslimMatters.org and the producer of the newly launched Muslim Matters podcast, so check that out, as well as a writer, speaker, and disability awareness advocate. She also has served on the board of directors of her local masjid and was responsible for disability accommodations in her facility. I'd also like to welcome Brother Abdi Warsam. He is the author of Always Rolling Forward, The Power of Hope Against Insurmountable Odds, and a survivor of Somalia's civil war. Abdi is currently a governor-appointed member of the Texas Rehabilitation Council. So thank you both so much for joining us. So I'm going to start with you, Zeba. As someone who served on a masjid board, and oftentimes it is these boards who are making decisions around accommodations, around how to spend resources. What do you think, what is the best advice you have for someone working to make their community more accommodating and more inclusive?
Assalamu alaikum. That's an extremely good question and a really difficult one at the same time, because one of the challenges that we face when it comes to how do you allocate masjid space? How do you allocate masjid funds? How do you prioritize what a committee will put on its requirements, and what norms have to be changed? This is almost impossible to do as long as people believe very sincerely and very incorrectly that maintaining the rights of the disabled part of our community and giving people accommodation and access and inclusion is optional, like it's nuffle, like it's something that you get to when you've done everything else. And yeah, I suppose we could do something for disability. It's really something that gets put to the side a lot. And changing people's mindsets is critical in getting them to change where they spend their money, where they spend their time, what events they'll put their support behind. You'll notice that our community can sometimes struggle with this when, say, for example, the ADA, and thank God it's there, has requirements for people with disabilities throughout society and culture and how we structure buildings. But typically mosques are repurposed from other buildings. And so what happens is the men's and women's bathrooms get repurposed. The men get the men's bathroom, then they get the women's bathroom for the wudu section. And then the women get the handicap bathroom for the bathroom and wudu area. And what do the handicapped people get? Nothing. Shoes in the hallway, so that if they get in the front door, they can't even get to the prayer area. And when we try to bring these things up, we're like, oh yes, brother, sister, we know it's important. And it's like, oh, can we make an announcement? Yeah, but we've got the fundraiser to announce. And also somebody has parked their Toyota behind the imam's car, and brother, can you please move your car? We find so many other things that we think are more important than this, when in actuality, I was very surprised by the ISPU numbers about people saying that they felt they were well accommodated. The ADA does not include such things as wheelchair-friendly wudu areas. How are people doing wudu if they can't sit on those things? The ADA does not answer Muslim specific things. You know, being on the board and having access to people's complaints was very frustrating at times, because you're almost powerless to distribute community funds and community resources when the community is at odds with what needs to happen in order to solve a problem. And until people learn about what our faith in our community actually requires in order for us to be truly muhsin, to be really have, you know, ihsan and excellence that we do, it requires a complete paradigm shift. As long as we keep building chandeliers, you know, as long as we keep making beautiful masajid that, you know, have no special classes and no quiet areas, as long as we put resources into bouncy castles and we don't do any ASL interpretation, our priorities are just always going to be in the wrong place. It was a very educational time period. It was very frustrating. We did accomplish some things, alhamdulillah, but there's just so much more that needs done and so much farther that we have to go before people are willing and willing participants instead of being dragged kicking and screaming by guilt, which, you know, organizations are importantly doing, and it has to happen. But it would be nice for people who don't have disabilities and people who don't have disabled family members to not have to lead the charge and to fight against the tide. It would be nice if the entire tide was flowing in the direction of a single community that watches out for all of its members, inshallah. There's no easy answer for that. I apologize.
Thank you so much. And you're getting so much support from the audience and the chat box. Thank you for that authentic and impassioned appeal to all of us to do much, much better. Turning now to Abdi, you do a lot of work with accessibility in the workplace. Can you share a little bit about your journey, your story, and what are the major challenges facing people with disabilities in the workplace?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sister. I'm delighted to be part of this special panel. So if I take a little bit of step back and give you a little bit, you know, background, I was born and raised in Somalia, and in January of 1991, I got a spinal cord injury out of a rocket explosion in Mogadishu, when the civil war started. So fast forward, August of 1995, my father and I immigrated to America. And as soon as I realized that there was no, cure for spinal cord injury, my priority and focus became education. So upon graduating from North Carolina State University with business management degree, I applied many jobs and, with no success. And interview after interview, I was rejected. So I began to wonder whether my disability was preventing me from obtaining jobs that I knew I qualified. So one day I heard that Singular Wireless, now AT&T, was at the campus of North Carolina State University conducting interviews. And I was told that there are few spots still available. So I signed up. The next day I went there, had the interview. It was very successful. And a few days later, I got a call from the HR office offering me a position, which was very exciting. But the interesting part of that was the position was available in Atlanta, 400 miles away where I was in Raleigh, North Carolina. My family and friends were not excited about it. They, essentially they said, you should continue your job search in the area. Hopefully you'll find one. But I knew I had to sacrifice, and I knew that I need to take a chance to get to my dream job. So I did. I packed up my stuff and left, Raleigh to Atlanta. That was 2006. I'm glad to say that I'm still working for AT&T. So I have been a passionate advocate for disability inclusion, particularly accessibility in the workplace. Back in 2017, I became the president of AT&T's Ability ERG Dallas chapter. That employee resource group was dedicated to advancing and advocating the issues impacting employees with disabilities at AT&T. During my tenure, we conducted awareness programs to shed some light on the various types of disabilities and how each deals with different challenges. We foster a general understanding and empathy toward employees with disabilities. We promoted the importance of hiring more of employees with disabilities. But I have to say, one of the projects that I am most proud of is a project that was it called AT&T Discovery District, a $100 million renovation project in AT&T's headquarters in downtown Dallas. I was tasked to put together a panel of accessibility experts to advise the project's design team. So I did that, and we advised the design team to go above and beyond of what is minimally required by the American with Disabilities Act. One of the recommendations we made was to install something called hearing loop. Hearing loop is a technology that crystallizes or amplifies the main speaker's voice while reducing or eliminating the surrounding noises. So if you are somebody with hearing difficulties, and if you use a hearing aid, your hearing aid can connect to the hearing loop, just the way smartphones connect to Wi-Fi. And through that, you're getting a clear and precise communication without the noise. That was particularly helpful in outside settings, in the auditorium, which they did, and in the park. And I am tremendously proud of that, because that is something that we can learn from. Our masjids, our place of worship, can take advantage of that type of technology. And our community members with hearing difficulties would benefit immensely, such a technology. As you mentioned, I'm also part of the Rehabilitation Council of Texas, where we provided policy recommendations to the vocational rehabilitation services in supporting individuals with disabilities to get training, to get employed, to retain their employmentship, and to create a sort of a support network that helps these individuals thrive in those environments. To conclude, I would say there are many challenges faced by individuals with disabilities, either at work or in the community. The least we could do is to raise awareness about the obstacles, the barriers that are in the way of these individuals from realizing their potential and becoming productive members in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing all of that. Juhi, I'm going to turn back to you to ask you a little bit more about Muhsin, the organization that you co-founded with Sheikh Omar Sulaiman. We know that it works a lot on disabilities in the American Muslim community, but one aspect specifically is working with Muslim organizations. What gains have been made when it comes to working directly with Muslim organizations on accommodations and awareness, and what still needs to be done? What are the major challenges still faced in the work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, a lot of our work is anchored around the mosques across America. And, working at that level, you heard from Zeba earlier, that in itself is a challenge because there are so many priorities for these boards. I have been asked, what's the incentive for us to do this? The answer I say is incentive. It's purely an unselfish incentive. It's love for your brother, what you love for yourself. Don't you want to go to the masjid? Don't you want to feel welcome? So there are challenges when, in their defense, because I have to say it that way, when board members don't see community members coming out with disabilities, and they say, where are these people anyway that you're speaking of? Well, we heard, and I think we can all unanimously agree, this is a very, very large group of people who are almost invisible. So being a part of an organization like Muslim and addressing this at the institutional level, we are expanding the reach of the message. So if we do have those prize masjids and prize organizations and prize affiliates and partners out there, we can get the voice out. Prior to founding Muslim, I was just this mom who didn't really have a voice. And mashallah, through working through the channels that our team has worked through, by building chapters and networks and now working with the communities, one of our biggest things is we're able to reach more people. And by doing so, others who do come out, they're visible and they're seen. And, if you're unseen, like, the masjid is not going to accommodate for you. So my one big message and one challenge is, I'm speaking to families like my own. Please don't stay at home. Please try. Please come out. Please access community. Please tell people what you need, because until you do that, we will remain invisible. And it's very difficult, and there are going to be challenges, and there's going to be some hurt along the way. And it shouldn't be the case, but we love it and we want it and we fight hard for it. So that would be, a huge message is for people to come out and try. For those communities that are getting it right, they include people with disabilities every single step of the way. I can list communities where there's not a single flyer that goes out for an event that it doesn't say for special accommodations, for Muslim accommodations, reach out to. It's just part of the fabric of what they do. All event planning, all committees, everybody lines up with things like that. Some of the successes have been working with outside the masjid, working with organizations. We have started something called service certification. That means you don't have to be a masjid to be certified by Muslim. That means that you can be an organization. We have many in the pipeline. One, I'll give an example, is Rabata. Rabata is purely an educational platform, sharing immense knowledge for women around the world. And the reach of Muslim has actually, because we've been partnering and working with them, and we've done trainings with them. We've worked with their team, their staff. They have now put into place accommodations and transcriptions and ASL interpreters that we provide. There's no fee for them. We don't even charge the organization. Muslim picks up the tab for that. And that reach is going worldwide now for people who need the ASL interpreter. So partnering up and getting these board members and getting these staff people at these organizations trained on sensitivity is so key, because there you have more advocates that are walking around and that are now speaking the same language as all the rest of us. And we're all talking about this is still one community, this is one ummah. And we really need to all kind of work together and include everybody. So some of that, working at that level has been really, really powerful and really helps to amplify the work that we're doing, alhamdulillah. And like I said, over 70 masjids are Muslim certified. We hold them accountable. We do an audit. if somebody lodges a complaint about something not being accessible, I thought it was beautiful. Brother Abdi was talking about even at the corporate level. We had members of a group of employees at Google on the East Coast reach out to Mohsen because somebody heard a khutbah by Mohsen. And they said at Google, we are retransforming some areas, making a prayer room, making a wudu facility, and they would like Mohsen to consult on that wudu facility. So this is what's beautiful about, it's not just me working, it's not just my staff working, it's not just our leads working, it's a full organizational effort now, and people know that they can come to us for help with these types of things. So alhamdulillah, it's been up and down, but over the years I think we see a lot of hope and a lot of progress. And inshallah, I just encourage community leaders, it doesn't cost you a penny. You just have to have an open mind and an open heart, and reach out to those in the community, like the people you've heard from today, who can advise and tell you. And no organization pays a fee to be certified by Mohsen. No masjid has to pay us anything to come in and do trainings and workshops and let people know what's needed. So that's what I'd like to say about that. But Jazakallah khair for having us here today. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for the critical work you're doing. We have questions now from the audience that I'm gonna start posing to you. The first one from an anonymous attendee: where can we find information about specific needs that are being ignored by the ADA? I think this person probably means information within our community of places where specific needs are being ignored.
If I may, because I mentioned this in terms of, wheelchair accessible wudu areas and other things like that, that ADA doesn't include. The best place to find someone is to actually ask the people in your community what they're missing. Because until, for example, somebody who is visually impaired told us the board about the shoes on the floor being a problem, we didn't know, because people just don't complain. And until we had somebody who told us, oh, this door doesn't open unless you pull on it really hard, and I have to wait for people to let me in to pray salah, we wouldn't know. And, as time passes, we learn more and more things. It would be wonderful if there was some sort of comprehensive list for masajid to go through so that they can do better, build better, provide better. But until then, the best way to learn is to ask the people who experience it directly.
Great, thank you. Just a question on language. What's the difference between the language of, quote, disabilities versus special needs?
I can take that. We've asked several times what people prefer, and there's no right or wrong answer on that. People have said in the past, and this is something that I'm just sharing feedback from people living with disability, people say generally they equate special needs to other than physical. And they say people have disabilities if it's considered physical. So special needs may be a learning disability. Special needs may be a cognitive disability in their mind. But disability is someone who is considered having a disability. Oh, they have multiple sclerosis, or they're in a wheelchair, or they have. So people have said that's kind of line that they've drawn, but it's all a matter of personal preference and self-identity. And there's no right or wrong answer. We as an organization, we do use both, because we realize that there are people out there who prefer to be called an individual with special needs, or there's a person out there who prefers to say, no, I'm an individual with disability. We do prefer to use person first language, which would put the person first at the center of the conversation, rather than a blind boy. We would say a boy who happens to be blind. It's one of the characteristics. But there, in our organization, there is no right or wrong between special needs and disabilities, and both are used.
Yeah.
But it's best to ask the person who you're dealing with what they prefer.
Absolutely. So another question from an audience member: if an adult has never been legally designated, quote, disabled in the US, and he or she may be sufficiently abled and sufficiently impaired to see him or herself as borderline, then what's the best way to determine whether or not the individual is in fact disabled? This seems quite sensitive since being officially considered disabled could impact employment opportunities, self-image, and access to government funds for disabled people. Whoever would like to take that question, I think it's a difficult one. I'm gonna put you on the spot since you work on these types of things in the workplace.
Yeah, so I mean, there isn't a clear cut. So if you're not even sure in yourself that you consider yourself a disabled, it is not a clear cut. But if you have some issues, I mean, physical is obvious. I use a wheelchair. It's very obvious, right? If it is related to cognitive, then obviously you have to be sensitive about what to share and who to share, right? Because yes, it can impact, the employment aspect. I mean, if you come to your boss and say, hey, boss, I'm having XYZ issues, your boss is not your doctor. That may at some point go against you. So I would say be very careful about what do you share, who to share. If judge the information, is it something you should share? There are a lot of things that you don't want to share. You don't want to share to anybody. But if you think that you are somebody who has some disabilities, who can benefit by disclosing that to the company, then find the appropriate, group within the company that you would share that information with, that can take on and then provide the assistance that is needed. So I would say it depends on each situation, but I would say these are what I've seen in the past. And, people tend to really not share as much or if any to anybody, especially when it comes to cognitive disabilities.
Yeah, and someone wrote in the chat, if the person needs accommodations to function at work and succeed at school or college, then the person needs to state that and speak up and not allow the lack of accommodations to hold them back from advanced positions or success. Absolutely. Another comment here, I run a group for blind and visually impaired Muslims, and we have found that in order for some to realize their full potential, they have to sometimes leave their communities and families. This is due to the fact that families do not see their children as being fully human beings. They might proclaim that, but that would not necessarily mean much. I wonder if you all could maybe comment on this idea that people sometimes need to leave their families and communities to fully realize their potential.
I believe that's a reality. Oh, sorry, was someone else saying something?
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, I believe that's a reality for a lot of people we come across. We do find that people find support where they find support. And sometimes there's a lot of anguish that comes with, living this life. And people, I had a large non-Muslim support when my daughter was first diagnosed with autism when she was much younger. And I found as the years grew that it wasn't enough for me. I love my non-Muslims brothers and sisters, and I'm grateful to have had them. And they shared a lot of amazing resources with me early on, but it wasn't enough for me. Spiritually, I still wanted that connection, and I still wanted to come back into the community. I left my community for 10 years. I sat at home and watched the website and watched online, very little online at the time, but I left my community and it took a while to come back. But you do come back and you do realize what you need, and you come back and you want to make it better for others. And so I don't recommend not coming back, but sometimes you do have to step away in order to understand and maybe kind of rebuild and come back into what, what's important.
Mhm.
And I would even,
Happy?
yeah, I would like to add, I would say even my story, I think sometimes it's necessary to go out of your comfort zone. When I get the job, back then, and they said it is in Atlanta, my friends, family member, they were saying, why would you have to go that far to a place that you haven't been and a place that you don't know anybody? Why don't you continue search position? So sometimes it is necessary to get out of the comfort zone, to see what your limitations are, and to challenge yourself, and and also prove to your family and others that you're capable of doing things that you dream about.
Mhm. Mhm.
I would have to agree with both Julie and brother Abdi. When you have a child with special needs, and I have a son with autism, and then when you yourself have a disability, like I live with chronic illness, just by the nature of what it takes to survive on a daily basis, the way you raise your kid, what you eat, where you go, how long you can stay out, can you be in that area? It's just too noisy, excuse me. You end up drawing boundaries in order to protect yourself and protect your child that almost by definition kind of isolate or exclude you from what the main group is doing. And there's generally two types of people in your life. There's people that will meet you on your side of the fence, say, yeah, I know your son can't eat that, I'm not bringing that, or I know you can't handle that, let's go here instead, or if you need to cancel because you're exhausted, we'll meet you later. And then there'll be people who will insist on, like, oh my God, how could you do that? All the other kids are going to eat this electric blue cake. I don't care if it makes your son, explode. There'll be always people who, will come and meet you where it works for you. And then there are going to be a lot of people who won't. And even if you don't physically leave your community, you do actually have to put up the boundaries that are important for your health and your sanity and your self-preservation. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that good fences make good neighbors sometimes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, this is all that we have time for, but we really we're very grateful for all of you joining us. And we know that further research is still needed to discover how faith communities can better meet the needs of people with disabilities, as well as the lived experiences of Muslims with disabilities in both Muslim spaces as well as the broader society. And I just want to say that organizations like Muhsin, who aim for both better communities and better daily lives for all adults and children who are living with disabilities, are key resources for communities, and I think must be strongly supported. Your feedback is very important to us, so please take a few minutes just to fill out this very quick poll, giving us your feedback on today's program. A follow-up email will be sent next week with resources relevant to this topic, so please share that with your network. And thank you very, very much for joining us today.